There was a really good presentation that Terence McKenna gave years ago, before my time, but I came across it in my adult life because of friends. It's called, I think the debate is called, or the discussion presentation is called Culture is Your Operating System. And it's Terence McKenna talking about how, you know, you believe the way you believe because of how you're born, where you're born, and the people who are around you and the people who program you when you're a child. But you can overcome that programming by realizing that culture is nothing more than an operating system, and you can choose to change your operating system by reformatting your hard drive. Furthermore, recently I saw Bill Maher was doing a stand-up bit. I think maybe it was from his show. I don't know. I'm not an intimate follower of his. I just happened to see the clip recently on like YouTube or TikTok. Well, he was talking about how people who live in the modern era and make claims like, well, I wouldn't have participated in slavery had I lived in that era. I would have promoted freedom for all, or I would have promoted the acceptance of transgender and gay people, even if I lived in a country where at the time it was considered illegal and they were burning people at the stake for those beliefs. It's very disingenuous of people to think that just because of the way that we believe in the modern era that those beliefs would have translated into that time period, because when you grow up in a time period, culture, regardless of the time period, culture is your operating system. And so if you're taught something from childhood, you are never going to know that anything is ever different. You're just going to believe that because that's the only thing you've ever known. It's, people who grow up in Christian countries have Christian beliefs. People who grow up in, countries where Buddhism is the main belief system, that's their religion, that's their belief system. People who grow up in Muslim countries, that's their belief system. Culture is your operating system. Something very important to think about. So when we come back to discussions like this, and I know that I think it's Eric Kane, I think is his name. It's Eric something, I always forget. He has a YouTube channel where he does stuff for Forbes on video games and stuff, and I really love his channel. He covered the Roald Dahl stuff recently, where these sensitivity editors have come back into the Roald Dahl publications, and they've started to go through there and modify language from these classical literature books to make them more palatable for the snowflake generation of people who can't handle the way things were written from a certain time period, and they find certain language offensive. And as an artist, I find this to be one of the most horrific things you could ever do. Art is subjective, but art is also a product of its time, place, and the individual. And the only person who has the right to modify a work is the original author. But here's the thing, in my mind, this also comes back to the discussion I've had about, well, it's not just about the original author, it's also the rights holders. And in this case, we're dealing with rights holders who have fallen hook, line, and sinker for this woke methodology that you have to come out here and make things more palatable for this snowflake generation because they find certain words offensive. It blows my mind. It also ruins art. And it's one of those things where there's a Christian Bale film. It's Christian Bale, Sean Bean. Oh, I can't remember what it's called now, but there's like the sensitivity police, and they burn all the art, they burn all the music, they burn everything. They make people take pills to strip the emotion out because they want people to just be drones, and they don't want people to ever feel emotion about anything because emotion is dangerous. Feelings are dangerous. Opinions are dangerous. They just want factory sheep who just work. And this is a step in that direction. We have sensitivity writers who are going back now into Agatha Christie novels. So it's not just Roald Dahl now. It's Agatha Christie, it's Roald Dahl, it's beyond that. What's next? We're going to go into The Lord of the Rings, and we're going to start modifying text in a fantasy novel, or are we going to go to the Bible next? Which, by the way, the Bible is one of the most horrific books out there in terms of offensive content, where we have, people literally being told to sell their daughters into slavery and let rapists get away with it. And it's the incest and all sort of genocide. Like if we're gonna talk about reworking literary works to remove potentially offensive language or themes, well, why aren't we looking at the Bible? But instead, we have these people who, many of them are, well, I don't want to. I'm rambling a little bit. I probably shouldn't say those things. Let's try to keep me focused, guys. This is a weird video. I don't normally do sensitive topics like this, but as a writer, this got to me. Because I happen to like the Agatha Christie novels, especially when we're thinking about the mystery novels that she wrote and they talk about here, like specifically we're looking at the Poirot and Miss Marple mysteries written between 1920 and 1976, have had passages reworked or removed in new editions published by HarperCollins to strip them of language and descriptions that modern audiences find offensive, especially those involving the characters Christie's protagonists encounter outside of the UK. Well, why were they written that way? Because of who she was and her cultural upbringing. Culture is your operating system. She was born into a colonial United Kingdom who viewed, I'm going to say something here that might be offensive. I don't mean it in an offensive way. I don't know the politically correct way to say this, so I'm going to say it in the way that I understand it. The UK at that time viewed all brown-skinned people, all of the brown people of the world, as inferior, and their resources were meant for the empire, and they went out there and did the same thing as the conquistadors and what the United States has done in recent years, where we go in and we conquer the brown-skinned people's places, and we take all their shit, and the British Museum is the joke about how the only reason the pyramids aren't in the United Kingdom is because they were too heavy to carry is a very poignant example of British colonialism at its peak. And she grew up in Britain during a time when British colonialism was at its peak, so her viewpoints were very much influenced by that. Now, does that mean that she should be put under a microscope and canceled because her viewpoints were such that she was influenced by the culture of her times? I don't think that that's a fair assessment to make. There have been conversations about Tolkien as an example of saying, well, his depiction of orcs is racist because he said they were slant-eyed, and that means he was racist against Asians. And it's like, I don't think that that's true. I think that he fought in World War II, and there was probably influences from the war that crept into his work, but that doesn't mean that he was racist by any means. Just as much as I don't think it means that Agatha Christie was racist in that she had descriptions in her books of things. So let's dive into this really quick. I'm 8 minutes into this and we haven't even gotten into the crux of this article. Sensitivity readers have made edits which were evident in digital versions of new editions. The updates follow edits made to books by Roald Dah and Ian Fleming as well to remove offensive references to gender and race in a bid to preserve their relevance to modern readers. The edits cut reference ethnicity, such as describing a character as black, Jewish, or gypsy, or a female's character torso as being made of black marble, or a judge's Indian temper, and removing terms such as Oriental and the N-word. The word natives has also been replaced with the word local. Has anybody here ever seen Dr. Zhivago? Great classic film, but the way it depicts the people of that time from the perspective of the British officers, are we now going to go back and start editing these classical films because they portray people of a certain ethnicity as inferior or different? Like, I understand where we live today. Our viewpoints on things have changed, and we live in a world where we understand now. There are obviously still people who struggle with this, but we do understand better these days that equality is a human right. Like, we do understand, most people understand that equality is a human right. Like, we're all human, we all have the same equal rights. But there are still pockets of the world where that's not true. And if we go back in time, those pockets were larger and larger. And you go back far enough, you get to a point where that was not true at all. Like, women were not equal, people of color were not equal. Like, you didn't have the right to vote, you didn't have the right, you were property. Like, all of these things, like horrific things have happened in history because people had these cultural viewpoints. Those have changed over times. and for the better. Where we are today is, much better. It's not perfect, but it's better. It's getting better all the time. Um, but the idea that we're going to come back and start changing things. You're now removing the cultural significance of these literary works. The same could be said for, what if we decided one day that it's no longer acceptable for the Mona Lisa to be considered to be a female? We have to make sure that she's gender neutral, right? So we go back and we make edits to the Mona Lisa painting to make that character gender neutral now as opposed to being a female. These are the types of things when I see this type of thing happening, my brain, I just can't fathom it. I can't comprehend it. And as an author myself, the idea that someone would come back 100 years later and try to say that I meant something because of the way I wrote something when I didn't mean that at all, trying to put their own context into it without understanding the context of the time that it was written in or my mindset at all. I find that to be the most offensive thing of all because you're literally putting your own projections into something. This is a very, very, very dangerous path to be going down. This is censorship at the absolute extreme, and it leads to a place where I'm terrified of going. I go back to that Christian Bale movie, which I can't remember the name of right now, with Sean Bean, where the sensitivity police have they've destroyed the art and they've destroyed the music and they burn it all because they don't want people to feel emotion. They don't want people to that's where this leads. That terrifies me. Sensitivity readers do not belong in anywhere. That thing, it shouldn't even exist. The work is the work. However it was written, however it was drawn, however it was painted, you can find it offensive. That's part of the appreciation of art. That's part of the subjectivity of art. It can be offensive to someone. That's what makes it a unique piece of art because it is something to someone and it's different for everyone. I don't know, folks. This is more of a rambling episode. I don't know that I do too many of those on my channel. I don't know how this will, be responded to on my channel. I suppose if you like this, like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. If you want to hear me talk about this kind of stuff more frequently, let me know in the comments below. Love to hear your thoughts on this. It's a tricky subject, but I just find that this is a dangerous path to go down. Censorship in any form like this, where we're suddenly dictating whether or not something is or isn't offensive, even when the writer may not have intended it to be offensive because they were just that was their cultural upbringing at the time. I think it's ridiculous to say that they were being offensive when they wrote those things. Well, they just didn't know any better. Oh, get out of here with that malarkey. Support if you can. Membership, super chat, super thanks to Patreon page, Discord, links are all down below. See everybody in the next episode.